Stiff me on overtime? Cue the long, expensive revenge, posted by Deleted. This happened in the early 2000s when I joined a startup. We agreed on a salary and no paid overtime and an evaluation in 3 months and then annually. Standard stuff mostly. It was a very mediocre salary for the work, but I really liked the work itself, which was extremely interesting and challenging. For me, even if the finances were so-so, I felt I'd learn a lot of skills which would be useful in the future. After 3 years of having 10 decent clients and a bunch of clients trialing and money rolling in, the talk turned to back pay and paid overtime, plus compensating for past overtime. At that point, around $50,000 in overtime had been accrued, which is a lot. Legally, it couldn't be back pay, so the talk was always of a discretionary bonus. Now, at this point, everyone is okay with this, myself included, and this was discussed in writing via the company emails too, so I felt secure and that no bad will was in play. I felt the company should be able to afford the payment, and equally, I'd happily settle for equity at a discount, which is legally possible there, if cash flow was an issue. The discussions about back pay, possible equity, and now started to drag on, and I was getting irked by this. In the end, I was made an offer of equity, which meant the company valuation was far beyond anything reasonable, in the hundreds of millions, and I'd get a minuscule stake, less than 0.01%, of a company with 9 employees and a projected annual turnover of around 2 million. It was a FU of sorts to stiff me out of my money, and I didn't want to take that lying down. To say I was furious was an understatement. Anyway, the day he made that offer, I handed in my resignation. This sent the CTO into panic mode because the CEO had refused an updated contract and I was still on a 1-month notice period. Plus, I had a lot of untaken paid leave. Basically, it meant that I was walking out right then and there. So, off I went that very same day, to the shock and surprise of everyone, I guess. The next day, I sent an official registered letter requesting my overtime and back pay and received a negative response, which I followed up with another detailed demand. This was also rejected because the bonus was discretionary and, quote, there is no overtime. However, I'd been seeking legal advice and I understood that they don't have a leg to stand on if I am willing to pay for an attorney. As the liability in such matters is firmly and 100% on the employer, I was willing. Now you need to understand that going to a lawyer was very rare in those parts back then, so companies didn't generally expect this outcome, and things have since changed. Now when going through the applicable laws with the attorney, I noticed there is a limitation of 7 years. So, while my attorney was laying out what to do in order to get me my money in as little as a few weeks, I just asked him what if we wait until it's 6 years and 11 months after the transgression and then file demanding interest. I wanted this because the law stated that back pay is due at a 9% APR above the base rate, which was 3.25% at the time. It's accrued daily for every day past the due date. We're looking at around 12 to 12.5% compound daily APR. The risk is that the company folds in that time, but I decided to take that risk. I sent one final letter stating that I expect, and I quote, all the owed and accrued amounts to date, end quote, to be paid immediately. And of course, nothing happened. For the next few years, life rolled on. The company did grow and become a known player in the area. When the time came, I found an attorney and started the case. We had copies of all the communications, copies of the registered letters and responses. The back pay demanded now, including interest, was $112,000. What I didn't know was that in addition to this, that there are fixed penalties for each instruction to perform uncompensated overtime. The total demand was something like $135,000. To say that the CEO, who was still the CEO, lost his crap would be an understatement. I got a very verbally abusive phone call, which I dutifully recorded as it wasn't completely unexpected, and was added to the filing. The CEO fought, or tried to, but when the judge heard the phone call, he took an immediate dim view. Reading through all the communication just put more nails in the defense's coffin. The judge just ruled and instructed the company to pay immediately and without delay, and also ordered the company to pay all my legal costs. They also got a full audit from the Department of Labor. The company paid up a week later. To add insult to injury, the evening of the court's decision, the CEO apparently got very drunk and crashed his car into another vehicle while drunk. He got a DUI conviction and lost his driving license for half a year, and his insurance refused to pay out for the damages to his vehicle, which is a brand new Mercedes S-Class, as he was drunk. All in all, a glorious day. This is a little bit of everything, man. This is ProRevenge malicious compliance style here. Hey, you followed the rules down to the letter, got the mega revenge, and then the CEO could not pull it together. Way to go, OP. I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there, posted by Reddit admin Dumb87. To give you some background on my friend Tim, made up name, he's been programming since he was like 7 years old. Tim said by the time that he got to college, he breezed through most of his comp sci classes because a lot of the content they were covering he'd already mastered years prior. Tim is an excellent programmer. Tim's career has been quite successful. He's worked for Google, Facebook, Amazon, and finally a hedge fund. The story starts at the hedge fund. Tim works with a lot of AI technology, and at this hedge fund, he was the lead programmer manager who spearheaded an effort to optimize their AI that helped them complete literally millions of trades a day. To say his work had a massive impact was an understatement. All of this going on with COVID-19 in the background, and due to the pandemic, they went to a work-from-home model, where my friend Tim kept working. During the work from home, Tim was looking around his fancy $4,500 NYC apartment and wished for things like a yard, heated pool, a nice 3-car garage, and not living in a high-rise. It dawned on Tim that he could leave New York City. Tim moves to Michigan. So Tim moved back to his hometown in Michigan, where he bought himself a really nice home with a heated pool, a 3-car garage, a nice yard, and guess what the yard had in it? A mother-in-love suite, which was essentially a 2-bedroom, 1-bath second home on the property of his main home, which he turned into his man cave. It's actually pretty sick. Oh yeah, and his mortgage payment was far less than his $4,500 month rent, like half. Tim spent the rest of his pandemic work from home pounding out projects and so on. He never actually informed his employer on an official basis that he'd moved. He just kept working. Then the pandemic ended. The pandemic is finally over, back to the office, or... Tim's boss, Larry, calls him up and goes, "All right, Tim, on Monday we're starting work back at the office." And Tim goes, "Yeah, about that. I moved to Michigan." Larry is shocked and goes, "You didn't even ask if you could do that?" And Tim basically said, "Well, I didn't know I needed your permission to move," in a sarcastic as heck way. Larry insists that Tim needs to move back to NYC or he won't have a place on the team. Tim says he's been doing the exact same work from home at a high level for the past year. He's willing to travel to New York City for a few meetings a year on his own dime, but he feels that his quality of life is so much higher outside of New York City, and he has no desire to live in NYC. To which Larry said if Tim doesn't have any desire to live in NYC, then he has no desire to keep Tim employed. Now, dear Reddit, what do you think a talented senior programmer with over a decade of experience who specializes in AI technology is going to say to a response like that? If you're thinking that he quit, you'd be absolutely right, he quit. Maintaining complex code can be hard. Now, anyone that has done any programming knows that sometimes the best person to maintain that code is the person who wrote the code. There's logic, there's thought processes, there's just so much that goes into programming that can be so individualistic that it can be hard for someone to take over a code base that they didn't write. John, CEO, enters the picture. 6 weeks goes by when John calls Tim. John is the CEO of the hedge fund. John gets Tim to agree to consider coming back, so that's when John suggests that they fly Tim to NYC and he sits down with John. Tim, however, flipped the switch and said, "No, how about you fly out to Michigan and we discuss this?" Tim said that he said that because he wanted to establish that if he was going to come back, it was going to be him working from Michigan, and if he was going to talk to his employment, it was going to be done in Michigan. John agreed, and 2 days later flew out to meet with Tim. So Tim sits down and John says that they really need him because he provided a lot of value to the organization, and the programming team, they're struggling. John offers Tim the opportunity to come back with a 20% pay cut since he won't be living in NYC, and John called that a cost of living adjustment. To which Tim said, "No, I want a 15% raise above what I was earning." John sits back and responds, "The reason we pay what we pay is because we ask you to live in New York City, and we understand that's an expensive city to live in." To which Tim says, "Hey, you pay what you pay, and you pay it because I'm worth it. If I wasn't worth paying what you pay, you wouldn't be paying me. Now, my first condition is, if you want me back, it'll be a 15% raise." John goes, "And second?" "The second condition is, I'll come back so long as Larry isn't there." John sighs, "Oh, you're asking for too much." To which Tim goes, "You don't need to bring me back if you don't want to. I'll be fine elsewhere." John goes, "I'll talk to the partners." And Tim says, "My offer is good till Friday." John goes, "What do you mean?" And Tim says, "Next Monday is when I'm going to start looking for work. This offer is good until Friday." And it was Tuesday. And then John leaves. That Thursday, the phone rings, and it's John. In conclusion, "Tim, we are transferring Larry to a different fund. He won't be working with you anymore, and we're fine with giving you a 15% raise. Can we send you an offer letter for you to sign?" Tim says, "Of course. And Larry is really gone?" John goes, "Yes, you'll never need to interact with Larry ever again." That was at the start of this year. Tim hasn't been in New York City, hasn't heard from Larry, and hasn't seen Larry on any communications, and so on. This story, if you ever see one story that is such a perfect example of the power that you can have and your knowledge and the value that you bring to your workforce, this is it right here. He moves out of state, far away. He gets a raise. He gets the old manager gone because they see the value and the power that he brings to their workforce. They wouldn't do it if he didn't bring the money and did not show, I say it again, value behind it all. OP, you nailed it. Terrorize my family, enjoy losing everything and going back to jail. Posted by Raditz Fan 9000. Myself and my wife had just had our second child and moved into a duplex in an amazing neighborhood, had its own playground even. We moved in and greeted the neighbors, bunch of younger people, but they seemed okay. The first day after moving in, we find that they're gone and they've left their 7-year-old on a school day outside of our door with a bag of goldfish and a note asking us to watch him while they went out. QCPS call number 1. The neighbors and me got along really well. The old guy next door repaired bikes for a hobby, and the next door neighbor did woodworking and would always come over to see the kids and send his grandkids over to play too. They warned us that our upstairs neighbors were trouble, constant traffic going in and out, and parties every single night. This was 110% the truth. It got to the point we couldn't sleep at night, and we had multiple altercations to the point that it was full-blown yelling matches. The landlord was useless and would do nothing to get rid of them, so I bided my time, and eventually, one night they came home in their red Mazda 3 and it was destroyed. They must have hit someone and ran, so I called the RCMP to let them know, at least the very least I figured they'd get in deep crap, but oh man, I had no idea what had just unleashed. Turns out the D-bag had a warrant out for his arrest for drug trafficking. He got hauled away in cuffs that night, and there's entitled woman 2 got a visit from CPS again as they left their son home alone again, and this wasn't once or twice, it was every single day. So my wife went digging for names and found the mother on Facebook. Using public record searches, we found out that they owed easy their home nearly $48K in assets as they'd taken off from the original address with all their furniture, including TVs and a huge sound system. 48 hours later, the sheriff was there with a box truck emptying their house. Took the beds, couches, TVs, the annoying subwoofer system, kitchen set, and even the dressers. CPS came shortly after and removed the child from the house. No, look, I didn't enjoy seeing him taken away, but they never fed him, and he was always in the same clothing, and it was falling apart. I mean, we even went out of our way to make sure that he had full meals when we couldn't let this kid starve. The D-bag went to jail for drug possession. He was out on bail, and he hid the drugs in a dresser they took. Entitled Woman 1 went to jail for assaulting the sheriff, and Entitled Woman 2 actually had a happy ending. As far as I know, after she lost her son, she went through multiple programs to clean herself up and started working to provide for her son. I ran into her a couple years ago, and she thanked me for what I did. I got ProRevenge on the drug dealer and his girlfriend, and thankfully helped someone get on the right path. Wow, this story reminds me of like you dig a hole with a shovel and the whole ground collapses underneath. Incredible detective sleuth work, OP Sherlock Holmes. I ruined my worst army boss for over $100,000. Click the video on your screen to see that one next. Don't miss it. It's brutal.